Economic outlook of the continent, and joining us to unpack this is Professor Nicholas Biekpe, who's Director of Development Finance at the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. Professor, good afternoon and welcome to our program.
Good afternoon and good afternoon to your listeners.
Yeah, when you look at the African continent, it has natural resources, minerals, and most of the time we are regarded as a continent that is sitting on a gold mine. But when you look around, there continues to be the poor African child. Societies are not benefiting at all from this name, the rich continent. Where are we getting it wrong?
I think we are getting it wrong in two fronts. If you remember, in 1963, when OAE was created, the then leaders had a vision to develop both the human resources and then the natural resources. And they did that until military coups in West Africa and then destabilizing forces set in. So the mandate was never realized that if to be prosperous, you need both the human capital component to correlate with the human resource development. So Africa then, after around 1960, when Ghana, the first military coup, and the trouble started in the continent, was just now focusing only on primary commodities. The problem with primary commodities is that you don't get value addition. So we mine gold, we get agricultural output, it's all sent abroad, then they process it and then bring it back and sell it for us. And then once you start having that, then you never become industrialized. So Africa, after independence, right, the industrialized focus was there, but then we lost it by concentrating, not developing our human resources, and also our natural resources were exported and then sold back to us. So that's how we lost in the poverty setting.
And then on the same token, we preach beneficiation, but the locals seem to be not benefiting at all, and we want to export goods so that we can balance our import-export ratio, but it's not working because when you look at the deficit, it is a very big margin.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we can't have beneficiation. We all want that, and I'm glad a lot of African countries, if you look, for instance, I was recently in Uganda where when they discovered oil, they decided that, look, we are going to process the oil in the country. So they build they are trying to build an oil refinery. But if you look back, in 1960, Ghana didn't have oil, but Nkrumah had the vision that maybe one day we start processing the oil that we try and process it in Ghana. So he built an oil refinery then. But we have lost all that. And so beneficiation comes normally with when you get a raw material, a raw product, to develop in a way that jobs are created, and then you then have the population benefiting from that. We still don't have that in Ghana, in the continent. So these are some of the things that the continent is now beginning to pick up. That is more than 60 years now.
Professor, let me pick your brain on the issue of the inter-Africa trade. We used to have dual economies based on bilateral countries' relations. And right now, when we are now talking about our envisaged efforts to have an African currency and to have regional blocks integrating so that we can even have the customs, the tariffs, not to be exorbitant so that there can be free movement of goods and people. Well, what is your view about this? Is it really going to work for the African continent as it may have worked for Europe?
I think it will work. And again, I even go further than that. It has to work. Africa is becoming slowly integrated. And I think one thing I always tell people that we should thank the West, and in particular the current U.S. government, is that they came in and said, you know what, you are on your own. So I think African countries are beginning to realize that the donor dependency syndrome that we had is going to actually is kind of evaporating very fast. So we have to start doing inter-regional, inter-country, dual, Ghana trade with Nigeria and vice versa. It has to work. If not in the next, if this thing doesn't work within the next 20 years, I mean, Africa will be something else. So it has to work. And I think the political will is there. The businesses are beginning to realize that they get a lot out of the continent than they get outside the continent. So it has, in my opinion, going to work, but it will take time. It requires some synchronizing of our trade rules, which is still one of the most cumbersome you can get anywhere in the world. So we need to loosen that up, but I think it's going to work.
Professor, one can say that how can it work when, number one, you have some African leaders who want to be in office for a lifetime. They've got different philosophies. They've got an old way of thinking, and they're not moving with the times. And they seem to be captured by the West, because if they don't toe the line, you'll find them disappearing. Let's make an example based on history. Look at Patrice Lumumba, for example, who was eliminated because of the allegations of the involvement of the CIA in his murder, because he wanted the local economy to benefit from the mineral resources of the country. When you look, for example, at the death of Muammar Gaddafi, who was advocating for the African independence and for the African unity in as far as a united economy is concerned. Now, are you saying that some African leaders are afraid to toe the line of the West, and if they do so, they may disappear? Is that why we are having a problem of leadership in Africa, and with the way they expedite, the way economic emancipation is supposed to happen on the continent?
You put it very nicely, and I think I'll add to what you've just, the way you frame it is really excellent. That's the problem we have. Most Africans, you remember I mentioned the aid dependency, but when you look at, there's no country that ever grew, the people ever benefited from donations or aid. But then I think historically that's always been the case. You look at African leaders when they come, the little tax that we collect is not used appropriately. The donor funding that comes in supposed to support the marginalized, it doesn't go to them. And then the other use that to support people that will keep them in power for a very long time. And I say this as an African, it's very painful to say this. But that is our major problem. But I'm, again, on the other hand, trying to say, look, things are changing. And things are changing in a way that I think Africans, the younger Africans, the people who are coming, whose future is so important. The younger ones, they realize that, look, if they don't start pushing hard through their voting rights, these leaders will not go anywhere. So things are beginning to change. And I think that in the next 10, 20 years, we are going to see a new generation, and this IT generation that's coming to force some of these leaders who unfortunately stay in power for far too long. But it's becoming a minority case now. I think that as time goes on, the continent is going to change. You get a more useful people coming to power, and then we start seeing some progress that will benefit the continent as a whole.
On a parting shot, President Cyril Ramaphosa, 100 days in office tomorrow. How has he fared so far? Very briefly.
I think he's done very well. I mean, one thing I talk to the president, he understands the business landscape. He also understands the political landscape. He understands the power of negotiation. So I'm looking towards, we're all looking, as those of us who are in this part of the continent, looking with kind of anticipation that he's going to make a difference. And remember, South Africa is a very big economy. If South Africa, Nigeria, and then some of the big African countries can come together, I think we are going to have a brighter Africa. And I think he's somebody that I think can actually do that.
All right, Professor Biekpe, thank you very much for talking to us, coming to us live from our Cape Town studios, and of course bringing us to the end of our business. Well, of course, on this FFA, which is your fantastic and fabulous Friday afternoon. It's been a pleasure doing business with you. Ciao, ciao.